This is Max, a golden retriever who, for 7 years, 2,555 consecutive mornings, arrived at the gates of Whitmore Mansion at exactly 6:30, never missing a single day. Rain, snow, suffocating heat, nothing stopped him. I watched him from the window, always intrigued, always moved. But what did that dog want, or who was he looking for? You see, Mr. Whitmore had died in 1978. 3 weeks later, the dog began his vigil. Everyone thought the same thing, loyalty to his deceased owner. But in September 1985, when I opened a dusty box in the basement and found old letters, faded photographs and forgotten records, the truth hit me like a runaway train. Max was never waiting for who I thought. He wasn't there out of longing. He wasn't there just out of loyalty. There was something more. Something that Mr. Whitmore had hidden from all of us. Something only that dog knew. And when I finally understood what Max had kept silent all those years, I realized that some secrets are so powerful that not even death can bury them. I am the billionaire butler. For 40 years, I served the wealthiest families in America, standing in the shadows of their grand estates, privy to their most intimate moments. I witnessed fortunes made and lost, empires built on lies, and dynasties crumbling under the weight of their own secrets. But of all the stories I carry, all the memories etched into these old bones, none has haunted me quite like the story of Max and the man everyone thought he loved. This is that story. The first time I saw Max was on a cold October morning in 1978. I had just arrived at Whitmore Mansion to begin the process of cataloguing the late Mr. Whitmore's estate. The old man had died 3 weeks earlier, sudden heart attack, alone in his study with a glass of 50-year-old scotch still warm in his hand. No family at the funeral. No real friends either. Just business associates in expensive suits, a lawyer reading the will to an empty room, and me, the butler who had served 3 generations of Whitmores, standing in the back row wondering what would become of this place. The mansion sat on 12 acres in the Connecticut countryside, built in 1892 by Mr. Whitmore's grandfather, a railroad tycoon who believed that wealth should be visible from the road. It was a monument to excess, all stone and iron and stained glass, with too many rooms and too many secrets locked behind too many doors. I had worked there for 15 years, serving Mr. Whitmore with the kind of discretion that men like him required. I knew his routines, his preferences, his moods. I knew when to speak and when to vanish. I knew which bottles he kept in which cabinets, which phone calls to interrupt, and which to pretend I hadn't heard. But I never knew about Max. That morning, as I walked up the gravel driveway with my leather briefcase and a thermos of coffee, I saw him for the first time. A golden retriever, sitting perfectly still at the iron gates, his golden coat catching the early morning light. He wasn't barking. He wasn't moving. He was just sitting there, staring up at the mansion's front door, as if waiting for someone to come out and call his name. I stopped walking. Something about the scene felt wrong. Or perhaps it felt too right, too perfectly composed, like a painting of loneliness that someone had hung at the entrance to warn visitors of what lay beyond. I approached slowly. The dog didn't acknowledge me. His eyes remained fixed on that door, unblinking, unwavering. I could see his ribs beneath his coat. Not starving, but not well-fed either. His paws were muddy, his tail lay flat against the gravel. I am a practical man. I have seen grief in many forms, worn by people in silk and cashmere, hidden behind champagne toasts and forced laughter. But I had never seen grief so pure, so undiluted by pretense or pride as I saw in that dog's eyes that morning. I knelt beside him, reached out my hand. He turned his head slightly, acknowledged me with the briefest glance, then returned his gaze to the door. Waiting, always waiting. I didn't know then that this would become his routine. I didn't know that 7 years later I would still be watching him from that same window, still wondering what he knew that I didn't. The estate lawyer arrived at 9. His name was Bernard Fletcher, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the perpetual expression of someone who had smelled something unpleasant but was too polite to mention it. He carried 3 briefcases and a folder thick enough to rebuild the mansion twice over. We met in Mr. Whitmore's study. The room still smelled like him, leather and tobacco and that expensive scotch. His desk was exactly as he'd left it, fountain pen uncapped. Ledger open to a page of numbers that no longer mattered, a photograph in a silver frame, turned face down. I had never turned it over. It wasn't my place. Mr. Fletcher spread documents across the mahogany desk, deeds, titles, investment portfolios, stock certificates, the accumulated wealth of 3 generations of Whitmores, all reduced to paper and signatures. But there was something wrong. I could see it in the way Mr. Fletcher kept adjusting his glasses, the way his fingers drummed against the leather briefcase. He cleared his throat, an old habit I had noticed, whenever he had to deliver news that money couldn't fix. There were debts, he explained, significant debts. Mr. Whitmore had been living beyond his means for years, borrowing against the estate, mortgaging the future to maintain the appearance of the past. The mansion would have to be sold. The contents auctioned. The staff, what little remained of it, let go. I nodded. I had suspected as much. Men like Mr. Whitmore rarely died with their finances in order. They believed they were immortal right up until the moment their hearts stopped beating. But there was one more thing, Mr. Fletcher said. One item in the will that he found curious. A provision that Mr. Whitmore had added just 6 months before his death. He slid a single page across the desk. I read it 3 times before I understood what I was reading. Even then, I wasn't sure I believed it. Mr. Whitmore had left a sum of money, not a fortune but enough, in trust for the care and maintenance of any dog that might appear at the gates of the estate after his death. The trust was to be administered by me, the butler, and the funds were to be used exclusively for the dog's welfare, food, veterinary care, shelter, everything the animal might need. But here was the strange part. The provision included no name, no breed, no description, just the phrase, any dog that might appear, as if Mr. Whitmore had known, as if he had been expecting someone. I looked up at Mr. Fletcher. He was watching me with the expression of a man who had seen too many strange things in too many wealthy people's wills to be surprised by anything anymore. Did Mr. Whitmore have a dog? He asked. Not that I ever saw, I replied. And yet here was this provision, legally binding, funded by a separate account that Mr. Whitmore had maintained in secret, an account that no one, not even his accountants, had known existed. I thought about the golden retriever at the gates, about the way he sat there, as if he belonged, as if he had every right to be there. That afternoon I walked back down the driveway with a bag of food I'd purchased from the general store in town. The dog was still there, same position. Same unwavering stare. I placed the food beside him. He glanced at it, then back at the door. He didn't eat. Not while I was watching. I returned to the mansion. From the window in the servants' hall, I could see him clearly. The sun was beginning to set, painting the iron gates in shades of amber and rust. The dog remained perfectly still, a statue carved from loyalty and something else. Something I couldn't name. At 6:45, precisely 15 minutes after I had left the food, he stood, ate quickly, efficiently, then walked away, disappearing into the tree line that bordered the estate. I didn't see where he went. I didn't follow. But something told me I would see him again. I was right. The next morning at 6:30 he was back. Same spot, same position, same unblinking focus on that door. And the morning after that, and the morning after that. Within a week, I realized that Max, as I'd begun to call him after finding the name on an old collar in the gardener's shed, wasn't just visiting. He was keeping a promise, or waiting for one to be kept. The mansion grew quieter with each passing day. The few remaining staff left one by one, accepting their severance and moving on to other estates, other wealthy families who needed their services. Soon it was just me, alone in that enormous house, administering an estate that no longer existed, caring for a dog that wasn't mine. But I had nowhere else to go. And neither, it seemed, did Max. I began to establish routines of my own. I would wake at 5:30, make coffee in the vast commercial kitchen that had once prepared meals for dozens of guests. I would walk through the empty halls, checking locks, covering furniture, watching as the mansion slowly transformed from a home into a museum of abandoned wealth. And at 6:25, I would position myself at the window in the servants' hall to watch Max arrive. He came from the east, through the trees, following a path that only he could see. His gait was steady, purposeful, not the excited run of a dog approaching home, but the measured walk of someone fulfilling a duty. He would sit at the gates, wait until 6:45, eat the food I left, then leave every single day. I began to keep a journal, not of the estate's dissolution, though I was supposed to be doing that too, but of Max. What time he arrived precisely, what the weather was like, whether he ate all the food or left some, how long he stayed before leaving. I told myself I was being thorough, that Mr. Whitmore's will required me to care for the dog, and proper care required proper documentation. But the truth was simpler and stranger. I was trying to understand. I was trying to decode the message that Max was delivering every morning, the secret he carried in his silence. Winter came early that year. By November, snow covered the estate in a blanket of white that made everything look cleaner than it was, purer than it had any right to be. The mansion's heating system, designed for a full household, struggled to warm the empty rooms. I lived in the servants' quarters, a small suite near the kitchen, and kept the rest of the house sealed off. But I still watched for Max, and Max still came. I wondered about him during those long winter nights. Where did he sleep? Did he have shelter? The trust Mr. Whitmore had established was generous, but it didn't include provisions for housing the dog. I couldn't bring him inside. The estate was in probate. I had no authority to make such decisions, but I could provide what I was allowed to provide. Better food, a warm blanket I left folded near the gates, a small wooden box I built, weatherproofed and insulated, just large enough for a golden retriever to curl up inside, which I placed discreetly among the trees where I had seen Max disappear. I never saw him use it, but every morning when I checked, the blanket inside would be rearranged, still warm. The weeks turned into months. Christmas came and went unmarked and unnoticed. The estate lawyer called periodically with updates. The mansion had attracted several potential buyers, but no one wanted to pay what the bank required. The auction house was preparing to catalogue the contents. Everything would be sold by spring, and through it all, Max kept his vigil. By January, I began to recognize the people who drove past the estate on their way to town. The local mailman, who always slowed down to look at Max. The woman from the general store, who once stopped her truck and asked me if the dog was all right, if he belonged to anyone. I told her he was being cared for. I didn't tell her by whom or why. Some things are too complicated to explain to strangers, but people talked. In a small town, a dog sitting at the gates of an empty mansion every morning for months becomes a story, becomes a symbol of something. Loyalty, people said, devotion. Proof that dogs love more purely than people ever could. They weren't wrong, but they weren't entirely right either, because there was something about the way Max waited that didn't quite fit the narrative people had created. It wasn't the eager waiting of a dog expecting his owner to return. It was something else, something more deliberate, more knowing, as if Max wasn't waiting for someone to come back, as if he was waiting for someone to understand. In March, the first buyer made an offer on the estate, a developer from New York who wanted to tear down the mansion and build condominiums. The bank accepted. The sale would be final by June. I had 3 months left. 3 months to close the chapter on the Whitmore legacy, to disperse what remained, to fulfill my final duties as the butler of a family that no longer existed, and 3 months to figure out what Max knew. I began to research. I went through Mr. Whitmore's papers more carefully, looking for anything that might explain the dog, the trust, the strange provision in the will. I found ledgers detailing household expenses going back 40 years, Employment records for staff members, some of whom I remembered, most of whom I didn't. Correspondence with business partners, lawyers, accountants, but nothing about a dog. Nothing about Max. I expanded my search. The gardener's shed where I had found the old collar. The stables long since emptied of horses. The groundskeeper's cottage at the far end of the property, abandoned for years. It was in the cottage that I found the first clue. A small thing, easily missed. A photograph tucked into a book about roses, both the book and the photograph thick with dust. The photograph showed a man I didn't recognize. Late 50s, maybe early 60s, wearing work clothes and gardening gloves. He was kneeling in what I recognized as the estate's rose garden, which had been spectacular once, before neglect had reduced it to thorns and weeds. And beside him, sitting perfectly still with his tongue out in a dog's smile, was a young Max. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded pencil, Thomas and Max. Spring 1976. Thomas, the groundskeeper. I remembered him vaguely, a quiet man who had worked at the estate before I arrived. He had left or been let go. I couldn't remember which. I had never thought to ask. The wealthy went through employees the way they went through money, carelessly and often. But here was Thomas, and here was Max, 2 years before Mr. Whitmore died. Which meant the dog had been at the estate, which meant Mr. Whitmore had known about him. So why had he pretended otherwise? Why had he created a trust that referred to the dog as if he were a stranger, an unknown variable, any dog that might appear? I slipped the photograph into my jacket pocket. I needed to know more. I needed to find out what had happened to Thomas, where he had gone, why he had left, but that would have to wait. Because when I returned to the mansion that evening, I found something that changed everything. Someone had been inside. I am a careful man. I lock doors. I close windows. I notice when things are out of place, and something was definitely out of place. The door to Mr. Whitmore's study, which I always kept locked, was open. Just slightly, just enough to notice if you were paying attention. I approached slowly. The house was silent. If someone was still inside, they were either very quiet or very gone. I pushed the door open. The study looked exactly as I had left it, except for one detail. The photograph on Mr. Whitmore's desk, the one that had been face down since his death, was now face up. I walked closer, picked it up, studied it in the fading afternoon light. It was a family photograph, old and faded, from the early 1960s, judging by the clothing and the quality of the print. Mr. Whitmore looked young, perhaps 40, standing stiff and formal in a suit. Beside him stood a woman I didn't recognize, beautiful in that careful way that wealthy women often are, and between them, holding both their hands, a small boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, smiling. I had never seen this photograph before, had never known that Mr. Whitmore had a family. He had never mentioned a wife, a child. In all the years I had served him, he had been alone. I turned the photograph over, no names, no date. Nothing to explain who these people were or what had happened to them. But someone had wanted me to see it. Someone had come into this house, into this study, and turned this photograph face up. Someone was trying to tell me something. I looked out the window. The sun was setting. Down at the gates, I could just barely make out Max's silhouette against the iron bars, still waiting, still watching, still keeping whatever secret had brought him here in the first place. I placed the photograph back on the desk, face up this time. Then I locked the study and went downstairs to prepare Max's evening meal. Tomorrow, I decided, I would begin asking questions in town. Someone would remember Thomas. Someone would remember Mr. Whitmore's family. Someone would know what had happened in this house before I arrived, before the silence settled in, before the only one left to remember was a golden retriever who refused to forget. But tonight, I would just watch and wait and wonder what would be revealed when I finally found the courage to look in all the places I had been avoiding. Because that's what I was doing, I realized. Avoiding. I had been caring for Max, documenting his routine, searching through papers and photographs, but I hadn't done the one thing that might actually provide answers. I hadn't asked Max himself. Oh, I knew he couldn't speak. I'm not a fool. But dogs communicate in other ways, through behavior, through choice, through the places they go and the places they avoid. I'd been watching Max arrive every morning for months, but I had never followed him when he left. I had never seen where he went, where he slept, what he did with the other 23 hours of his day. I had been respecting his privacy, I told myself, giving him space. But the truth was simpler. I had been afraid of what I might discover. Afraid that following him would break whatever spell allowed him to keep returning, day after day, to a place where no one was waiting for him, except I was waiting. Every morning at 6:25, I was at that window, watching for him. We had become companions in a strange sort of way, bound together by routines and mysteries we couldn't explain to anyone else. The next morning, after Max had eaten and begun his walk back into the trees, I followed him. I kept my distance, stayed quiet, moved carefully through the underbrush, grateful for the years of service that had taught me how to be invisible, how to exist in spaces without disturbing them. Max moved with purpose. He didn't wander or explore. He followed a specific path, worn smooth by months of repetition, through the trees and down a slope toward the creek that marked the eastern boundary of the Whitmore property. And there, just beyond the property line, in a small clearing surrounded by oak trees, was a cabin. Small, maybe 2 rooms. The wood was weathered but solid. Smoke rose from a chimney. Someone lived there, and Max was going home. I stopped walking, watched from behind a large oak as Max approached the cabin door and sat down waiting. A moment later, the door opened. An old woman stepped out. She must have been 70 at least, thin and bent with age, wearing a faded house dress and a cardigan despite the spring warmth. She looked down at Max and smiled, the kind of smile that transforms a face, that makes you understand that this person has known love and loss in equal measure. She reached down and scratched Max behind the ears, said something I couldn't hear. Then she went back inside, leaving the door open, and Max followed her in. I stood there for a long time after the door closed, trying to understand, trying to fit this new piece into the puzzle I had been slowly assembling. Max had a home, had someone who cared for him. He wasn't homeless, he wasn't abandoned. Every morning he left this cabin, walked through the woods, sat at the gates of Whitmore Mansion for 15 minutes, then came back here, by choice, by routine, by commitment to something I still didn't understand. I walked back to the mansion slowly, my mind churning. Who was that woman? How did she know Max? Was she connected to Thomas, the groundskeeper? Was she connected to Mr. Whitmore? And most importantly, why had no one mentioned her? In all the paperwork, all the estate records, all the employment documents, I had found no reference to a cabin beyond the property line. No reference to neighbors. Nothing. As if she didn't exist. As if she had been deliberately erased. I spent the rest of that day in the estate office, going through every box, every file, every scrap of paper I could find, looking for anything that might explain who lived in that cabin. And finally, buried in a folder of property deeds from the 1960s, I found it. A single piece of paper, a survey map of the Whitmore estate, showing the boundaries, the buildings, the access roads. And there, marked in faded blue ink at the eastern edge, was the cabin. But it wasn't marked as a neighbor's property. It was marked as part of the Whitmore estate itself. Employee housing, the notation said. Groundskeeper's residence. Thomas had lived there, and apparently someone still did. I looked at the date on the survey map, 1965, 2 years before I had come to work at the mansion, before I knew anything about the Whitmores or their secrets. But someone had known. Someone had been here all along. Someone had been watching from that cabin while the mansion slowly emptied, while Mr. Whitmore died alone, while I arrived every morning to manage an estate that was little more than a ghost, and that someone had sent Max to the gates every morning, had given him a routine, had kept him connected to this place for reasons I was only beginning to understand. I needed to meet her, needed to ask her questions that might finally have answers, but I also needed to be careful. People don't hide in cabins on abandoned estates without reason. People don't send dogs on daily pilgrimages to empty mansions without purpose. Whatever I was about to discover, I had a feeling it would be the kind of truth that changes how you see everything else. The kind of truth that explains why some secrets are kept silent, even after everyone who knew them has died. Almost everyone, because Max knew, and the woman in the cabin knew, and tomorrow, I decided, I would know too. But tonight, as I watched the sun set over the Whitmore estate for what felt like the 1,000th time, I allowed myself to appreciate the beauty of the mystery. The way Max had become a thread connecting past to present, silence to revelation, death to whatever came after. Tomorrow would bring answers, but tonight I was content to simply wonder and to watch, always watching, because that's what butlers do. We stand in the shadows and observe. We see everything and say nothing. We carry secrets that aren't ours and serve people who never truly know us. But sometimes, if we're very lucky, we witness something that transcends service, something that reminds us why loyalty matters, why devotion endures, why some stories demand to be told, even if no one is listening. This is one of those stories, and I am only just beginning to understand it. Max's Story, Part 2. The next morning I didn't watch from the window. Instead, I walked down to the gates and waited. When Max arrived at precisely 6:30, I was already there, sitting on the stone wall beside the entrance, a thermos of coffee in my hands and questions burning in my throat. He saw me and paused, just for a moment. Then he walked to his usual spot and sat down, his eyes fixed on the mansion door as always. I watched him in silence, let the ritual complete itself. At 6:45, he stood and began walking toward the trees. And this time, I walked with him. He didn't seem surprised, didn't try to lose me or change his path. If anything, there was something almost relieved in the way he moved, as if he had been waiting for this moment, as if he had been hoping that someone would finally follow, finally ask, finally care enough to understand. We walked through the morning mist, following that worn path through the trees, down the slope, across the creek on stepping stones that someone had carefully placed years ago. And then we were standing in front of the cabin, and I could see it more clearly in the daylight. The garden in front overgrown but still tended, the curtains in the windows faded but clean, the smoke from the chimney steady and domestic. Max walked to the door and scratched gently. A signal, a request. The door opened. The old woman stood there, and in the morning light I could see her more clearly. The lines on her face, the silver in her hair, the way her hands trembled slightly as she reached down to touch Max's head. And then she looked up and saw me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We stood there separated by perhaps 10 feet and what felt like decades of silence, studying each other with the wariness of people who have learned not to trust easily. Then she smiled. It was a sad smile, the kind that knows too much and has given up trying to explain. "You're the butler," she said. Her voice was soft, worn smooth by time and sorrow. "I've seen you watching." "I am," I replied. "I'm sorry to intrude, but I need to understand. I need to know why Max keeps coming to the gates, what he's waiting for, what Mr. Whitmore knew." She studied me for another moment, then stepped aside. "Come in," she said. "It's time someone knew the whole story. Past time, really." The cabin was small but carefully kept. One room served as both kitchen and living space, with a wood stove, a small table, 2 chairs, and walls lined with bookshelves. The other room, I assumed, was a bedroom, though the door was closed. Everything was clean, organized, loved in the way that simple things are loved when they're all you have. She gestured to one of the chairs. "Sit. I'll make tea." I sat. Max settled at my feet, his head resting on his paws, as if he had heard this story before and knew it would take a while. The woman moved slowly, deliberately, filling a kettle and setting it on the stove. "My name is Eleanor," she said. Eleanor Chen. I was married to Thomas Chen, the groundskeeper at Whitmore Mansion. Perhaps you found his name in the records. I did, I said. I found a photograph, him and Max, in the rose garden. She nodded. Thomas loved those roses, loved them more than Mr. Whitmore ever did, which is ironic considering whose garden it was. But that was Thomas. He could find beauty in things that other people only saw as decoration. He could make things grow that had no business growing. He had a gift. She poured the tea, brought 2 cups to the table, sat down across from me with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years. Thomas came to work at the estate in 1965, she said. We had just married. He was 42. I was 38. Late, by most standards, but we had waited for each other without knowing we were waiting. When you meet the right person, age doesn't matter. Time doesn't matter. All that matters is that you found them. She wrapped her hands around her teacup, stared into it as if reading tea leaves, searching for a future that had already passed. Mr. Whitmore hired Thomas because the previous groundskeeper had died, and the gardens were in shambles. The roses were diseased. The lawns were overgrown. The whole estate looked like it was surrendering to nature. Mr. Whitmore couldn't have that. He had a reputation to maintain. So he hired Thomas and gave us this cabin to live in. Those were good years, she continued. Thomas worked from dawn to dusk, and I helped when I could. We turned that estate into something magnificent. The roses bloomed in colors you couldn't believe. The lawns were so green they hurt your eyes. People would drive by just to look. Photographers came. Garden magazines featured it. For a while, the Whitmore estate was famous for its beauty. But Mr. Whitmore, she said, her voice changing slightly, hardening around the edges. Mr. Whitmore was not a happy man. He had money. He had status. He had a beautiful wife named Catherine and a son named Michael. From the outside, his life looked perfect, but inside, he was rotting. She took a sip of tea, looked at me directly. Have you ever known someone who couldn't love? Not wouldn't, but couldn't, as if that part of them was simply missing, like a color they couldn't see or a note they couldn't hear. I thought about Mr. Whitmore, about the 15 years I had served him, about the coldness that had always surrounded him like an invisible wall. Yes, I said. I think I have. Eleanor nodded. That was Mr. Whitmore. His wife Catherine was kind. His son Michael was a sweet boy, gentle and curious, always asking questions, always trying to understand the world. But Mr. Whitmore looked at them the way you might look at furniture. Necessary, useful, but not loved. She paused, took a breath, and then in 1972, Catherine and Michael disappeared. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Disappeared. Vanished, Eleanor said. One day they were there, the next they were gone. No explanation, no goodbye. Mr. Whitmore told everyone they had gone to stay with Catherine's family in California. Extended visit, he said. Needed a change of scenery, but they never came back. And after a few months, people stopped asking. That's what people do. They stop asking. But you knew something, I said. Thomas knew, she corrected. Thomas saw things. Heard things. He worked close to the house. He was invisible to people like Mr. Whitmore, the way servants always are. And one night, about a week before Catherine and Michael disappeared, Thomas was working late in the greenhouse, and he heard shouting from the mansion, terrible shouting, things breaking, a child crying, and then silence. Eleanor's hands tightened around her cup. The next morning, Thomas went to work as usual. He saw Mr. Whitmore on the terrace, reading the newspaper, drinking coffee, as calm as could be. But Catherine's car was gone, and that night, Thomas saw Mr. Whitmore burning papers in the fireplace, legal documents, photographs, letters, burning everything that connected him to his family. She looked up at me. We never saw Catherine or Michael again. And we never spoke about it, because men like Mr. Whitmore, men with money and power and connections, they can make people disappear. They can rewrite history. They can silence anyone who asks too many questions. I felt sick. Are you saying he killed them? Eleanor shook her head slowly. I'm saying I don't know. Thomas didn't know. We had suspicions but no proof. Maybe they left. Maybe they're alive somewhere under new names, hiding from a man who couldn't love them. Or maybe they're not. We'll never know. But what we do know is that Mr. Whitmore erased them, removed them from his life as if they had never existed. And he spent the next 6 years living in that mansion alone, surrounded by beautiful things, dying slowly from the inside out. And Max? I asked. Where does Max fit into this? Eleanor smiled, though her eyes remained sad. Max was Michael's dog. Catherine gave him to Michael for his 8th birthday in 1971. Max was just a puppy then, all paws and energy and unconditional love. Michael adored him. They were inseparable. Where Michael went, Max followed. They slept in the same room, ate breakfast together, played in the gardens while Thomas worked. She reached down and stroked Max's head. After Catherine and Michael disappeared, Max stayed at the mansion. Mr. Whitmore couldn't get rid of him without raising questions, so the dog stayed. But Mr. Whitmore ignored him, never fed him, never acknowledged him. It was as if Max was a ghost, a reminder of something Mr. Whitmore wanted to forget. So Thomas cared for him, I said. Every day, Eleanor confirmed. Thomas would come up to the mansion early, before Mr. Whitmore woke, and bring Max down here, feed him, let him run in the woods, give him the love and attention that Michael would have given him. And then every evening, Thomas would take Max back to the mansion and put him in the old gardener's shed, where Michael used to visit him, because Max kept hoping, kept believing, kept waiting for Michael to come back. I understood now, understood the pattern, understood the loyalty. Even after Thomas died, I said quietly, Max kept the routine. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Thomas died in November 1978. Heart attack, sudden. He was working in the rose garden one morning and he just collapsed. By the time I reached him, he was gone. 3 weeks later, Mr. Whitmore died the same way. Same sudden departure. Same silent ending. As if death had decided to clean house. She wiped her eyes. After Thomas died, Max didn't know what to do. He had lost Michael. Then he had lost Thomas, the only other person who had loved him. He came back here to the cabin because this was his home. But every morning he would walk up to the mansion, go to the gates, wait, because that was the routine. That was the promise. And dogs, unlike people, don't break promises. Why the gates? I asked. Why not the shed where he used to sleep? Why not the rose garden where Thomas worked? Because that's where Michael used to wait for his father, Eleanor said softly. Every evening, when Mr. Whitmore came home from work, Michael would run down the driveway and wait at the gates. He would stand there, excited and hopeful, believing that maybe today his father would smile at him, talk to him, love him. It never happened. But Michael never stopped hoping. She looked at Max, and neither did Max. He's waiting at the gates because that's where Michael waited. He's keeping Michael's hope alive, even though Michael is gone, even though everyone is gone. Because that's what love does. It endures, it persists, it refuses to accept that some things can never be recovered. I sat in silence, absorbing this, the weight of it, the tragedy of it. A child waiting for love that never came, a dog waiting for a child who never returned, a groundskeeper caring for both of them, invisible and essential, until death claimed him too. And Mr. Whitmore? I asked. Did he know? Did he understand what Max was doing? Eleanor nodded. He knew. In the last year of his life, something changed in him. Thomas noticed it. He would see Mr. Whitmore standing at the study window, watching Max. Not with anger or irritation, but with something that might have been regret, as if he was finally seeing what he had lost, what he had thrown away, what he could never get back. That's why he created the trust, I said. Why he left money for Max's care. It was his way of apologizing. Or his way of ensuring that someone kept remembering, Eleanor said, that someone kept bearing witness to what he had done, that the story wouldn't die with him, because men like Mr. Whitmore, they want to be remembered, even if what they're remembered for is terrible. We sat in silence for a while. Max had fallen asleep at my feet, his breathing steady and peaceful. Outside, birds were singing. The sun was climbing higher. The world was continuing as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't just learned that the estate I had managed, the man I had served, the life I had lived for 15 years, had all been built on silence and erasure and secrets that poisoned everything they touched. "What happened to Catherine and Michael?" I asked finally. "Do you really believe they're dead?" Eleanor looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "I believe they're gone. Whether that means dead or disappeared or hidden, I don't know. But I do know that Mr. Whitmore made sure no one could find them, no one could prove anything. And in the end, isn't that the same as death, to be erased so completely that you might as well have never existed?" She stood slowly. "There's something I need to show you. Something Thomas found before he died. He didn't know what to do with it, so he kept it hidden. But I think you should have it now." She walked to the bookshelf and removed a large atlas. Behind it, built into the wall, was a small compartment. She reached inside and pulled out a metal box, the kind that important documents are kept in, fireproof and locked. She brought it to the table, opened it with a key she wore on a chain around her neck. Inside were papers, legal documents, birth certificates, marriage licenses, and photographs. Dozens of photographs of Catherine and Michael, smiling, happy, alive. "Thomas found these in the greenhouse," Eleanor said, "hidden in a false bottom of an old storage chest. Mr. Whitmore must have hidden them there after he burned everything else. Maybe he couldn't bring himself to destroy these last pieces. Maybe some small part of him still remembered what it felt like to have a family." I looked through the photographs. Michael was beautiful. Blonde hair, bright eyes, the kind of child who makes you believe the world might be a good place. And Catherine looked at him with such love, such fierce, protective love, that it hurt to see it. In one photograph, Michael was sitting in the rose garden with Max. The dog was just a puppy, and Michael had his arms wrapped around him, both of them grinning at the camera. Written on the back, "Michael and Max, summer 1971, best friends." I felt tears on my face and didn't bother to wipe them away. "This is what Max remembers," I said. "This is who he's waiting for." Eleanor nodded. "Every single day. For 7 years. Because love doesn't forget, and loyalty doesn't calculate whether it's worth continuing. It just continues." She reached into the box again and pulled out one more item. An envelope sealed, with my name written on the front in handwriting I recognized as Mr. Whitmore's. "He left this with Thomas," Eleanor said, 6 months before he died. "Told Thomas to make sure the butler received it when the time was right. I didn't know if the time would ever be right. But I think maybe it's right now." I took the envelope with trembling hands, opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and on it, in Mr. Whitmore's precise script, was a letter. "To the butler, by the time you read this, I will be dead, and you will have discovered what I spent years trying to hide. You will know about Catherine and Michael. You will know about Max. You will know that I am not the man I pretended to be. I cannot explain why I did what I did. I cannot make you understand the emptiness inside me, the inability to feel what normal people feel. I looked at my wife and son and felt nothing. I looked at wealth and power and felt nothing. I was born broken, and I remained broken until the day I died. But I want you to know that in my last year, when I watched Max sit at those gates every morning, waiting for a boy who would never return, I felt something, not love. I don't think I'm capable of that, but something close to regret, something close to understanding that I had destroyed the only things in my life that mattered. The trust I created for Max is not an apology. Nothing I do can apologize for what I've taken from the world, but it is an acknowledgement, an admission, a way of saying that I knew at the end what I had done. Catherine and Michael are gone. Where they are, I cannot say. What happened to them, I will not say. But they are beyond my reach now, and perhaps that is the only mercy I ever offered them. Take care of Max. Let him keep his vigil. Let him remember what I tried to forget, because some things deserve to be remembered, even if remembering them breaks your heart. I lived a rich man and died a poor one. Not in money, but in everything that makes money meaningless. Learn from my mistakes. Love while you can, before you realize too late that you never learned how. H. Whitmore. I read the letter 3 times. Each time, I felt something shift inside me, some understanding deepening, some judgment I had been holding loosening its grip. He knew, I said. At the end, he knew. Eleanor nodded. But knowing isn't the same as changing. And by the time he knew, it was too late to fix anything. All he could do was bear witness to his own failures and hope that someone would understand what he was trying to say. What do we do with this? I asked, gesturing to the box, the photographs, the evidence of a family that had been erased. We keep it safe, Eleanor said. We keep remembering, because that's what Max has been doing all along. He's been keeping Michael alive, keeping the memory of a boy who loved him, a boy who deserved better, a boy who vanished into silence and might never be found. She looked at me seriously. The estate will be sold soon. You'll move on. I'll stay here until I can't anymore. But Max will keep his routine, keep his vigil, keep waiting, and someone needs to bear witness to that. Someone needs to understand what it means. I will, I said. I'll keep watching, and I'll keep trying to understand. We sat together for a while longer, drinking tea, watching Max sleep, both of us thinking about loyalty and love, and the terrible things people do to each other when they forget how to be human. Eventually, I stood to leave. Eleanor walked me to the door. Before I stepped outside, she put her hand on my arm. Thank you, she said, for following Max, for caring enough to ask questions. Thomas would have liked you. He always said that the best servants are the ones who serve something larger than their employers, who serve truth even when truth is dangerous. I nodded, couldn't quite speak, walked back through the woods alone, my mind full of images and questions and a grief that I couldn't fully name. The mansion looked different when I returned. Still beautiful, still impressive. But now I could see the emptiness at its heart, could feel the silence that lived in every room, could understand that wealth without love is just an expensive way to be alone. Over the following weeks, as the estate sale progressed, as the mansion was emptied of furniture and art and all the accumulated possessions of 3 generations of Whitmores, I continued to watch Max. Every morning at 6:30, he arrived. Every morning I was at the window bearing witness. I had the photographs Eleanor gave me framed, hung them in my small room in the servants' quarters, Michael and Max in the rose garden, Catherine holding Michael as a baby, Thomas with his hands in the soil, smiling at something beyond the camera's view. These were the real treasures of the Whitmore estate, not the paintings or the silver or the antique furniture that collectors fought over at auction. These photographs, these memories, these people who had been loved and lost and erased. In June, the mansion was sold. The developer began his plans to tear it down. I was given my final payment and told my services were no longer required. I packed my belongings, closed the servants' quarters for the last time, and walked down the driveway one final morning. Max was at the gates, as always. I knelt beside him, scratched behind his ears the way I had seen Eleanor do. Tried to find words that could possibly express what I wanted to say. I understand now, I told him. I understand what you're doing, and I want you to know that it matters. Your loyalty matters. Your memory matters. Michael mattered, and you're keeping him alive in the only way you know how. Max looked at me with those wise, sad eyes. Then he looked back at the mansion, already being dismantled, already disappearing. I stood, walked away. Looked back once to see Max still sitting there, still waiting, still keeping his promise to a boy who had loved him 7 years ago. I never went back to the estate, never saw what the developer built in place of the mansion. But I heard from Eleanor periodically, letters written in her careful script, updating me on Max's progress. He kept his routine for another 2 years. Every morning at 6:30, even after the mansion was gone, even after the iron gates were removed and condominiums rose where roses once bloomed, Max would walk to the place where the gates had been and sit there for 15 minutes. And then, One morning in the spring of 1987, he didn't come home. Eleanor found him later that day, lying peacefully in the clearing where the rose garden had been, his head resting on his paws as if he had simply decided to take a nap and never woke up. She buried him there in the garden he had loved, near where Thomas was buried, under a stone that read simply, "Max, faithful friend, forever waiting." I received the letter telling me this on a Tuesday. I sat in my new position, in a new house serving a new family, and I wept. Not just for Max, but for all of them. For Michael, who had loved a dog and been loved in return. For Catherine, who had tried to protect her son from a man incapable of love. For Thomas, who had cared for creatures and plants with more devotion than most people give to their own families. For Eleanor, who kept watch over memories that everyone else wanted to forget. And yes, even for Mr. Whitmore, who had lived 74 years and never once felt what Max felt every single morning when he walked to those gates. Some people believe that dogs don't have souls, that they're just animals, operating on instinct and training, incapable of the complex emotions that define humanity. Those people have never met a dog like Max, because Max understood something that most humans spend their entire lives failing to grasp. He understood that loyalty isn't about reward or recognition. It isn't about getting something in return. It's about keeping promises, even when the person you made the promise to is gone. It's about showing up day after day, not because anyone is watching or caring or appreciating, but because showing up is what love does. Michael waited at those gates for his father to love him, and his father never did. And when Michael was gone, Max kept waiting, kept hoping, kept believing that somehow, someday, love would return to that place. It never did. The mansion was destroyed, the family was erased, the gardens were paved over. Everything that had been beautiful about the Whitmore estate was reduced to profit margins and property values and units of measurement that had nothing to do with the human heart. But for 9 years, a golden retriever named Max kept a vigil, kept a promise, kept alive the memory of a boy who deserved to be remembered. And I was there to witness it, to understand it, to carry forward the story that no one else wanted to tell. That's what I've learned in my 40 years of service. That the real stories, the ones that matter, are rarely the ones that make it into obituaries or society pages. They're the quiet stories, the ones about groundskeepers and dogs and children who loved too innocently and paid for it with their disappearance. These are the stories that servants carry, the stories we see because we're invisible, because we exist in the margins, because we're present for the moments when people forget to pretend. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to tell these stories, to make sure that someone, somewhere knows that it all happened, that these people existed, that their love mattered. Michael Whitmore existed. He loved a golden retriever named Max with the pure, uncomplicated love that children are capable of before the world teaches them to be cautious. Max loved Michael back with the eternal, unchanging love that dogs give freely without calculation or condition. And for 7 years after Michael was gone, Max proved that some loves don't end just because the person you love disappears. Some loves persist. Some loves show up every single morning at 6:30. Rain or shine, heat or cold, hope or despair. That's what I discovered when I followed Max through the woods that spring morning. I discovered that I'd been living in a mansion built on silence and secrets, serving a man who had destroyed everything worth having, and that the only truth worth knowing was being demonstrated every day by a dog who refused to forget. I am 72 years old now. I've served in a dozen great houses. I've seen wealth and poverty, kindness and cruelty, love and its absence. I've kept more secrets than I can count, and witnessed more tragedies than I care to remember. But when I close my eyes and think about loyalty, about devotion, about what it means to keep faith with something larger than yourself, I see Max, sitting at those iron gates, waiting for a boy who would never come home, keeping a promise that no one asked him to make. Some people would call that sad, would say that Max wasted 9 years waiting for something impossible, would pity him for his inability to move on, to forget, to accept reality. I disagree. I think Max understood something profound. He understood that love isn't measured by outcomes or results. It's measured by consistency, by showing up, by refusing to let absence become erasure. Every morning, Max said the same thing. Michael mattered. Michael existed. Michael was loved. And by saying it every single day for 7 years, Max made it true, made it impossible to forget. Made sure that even after the mansion was gone, even after everyone who knew Michael had died or moved away or chosen to forget, someone still remembered. I remembered. Eleanor remembered. And now, if you're hearing this story, you remember too. That's the power of loyalty. It transcends death. It outlasts buildings. It refuses to accept that some things can simply be erased from history. Michael Whitmore was 8 years old when he disappeared. He had blonde hair and a smile that could light up a room. He loved his dog more than anything in the world, and somewhere, somehow, I have to believe he knew that his dog loved him back, that Max never forgot, that Max kept the faith. That has to be worth something, that has to mean something, even if meaning is all we have left. If this story has moved you, I need to ask you something. In the comments below, tell me, have you ever witnessed loyalty that defied logic? Have you ever known someone, human or animal, who kept showing up long after everyone else had given up? Have you ever been that person yourself, waiting at the gates for something that might never return? Your story matters. Share it with us, because these stories, these acts of devotion that seem foolish or impossible to the practical world, these are what make us human. These are what remind us that love isn't about winning or achieving or getting something back. It's about showing up. Every single day, rain or shine, hope or despair. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who's waiting at their own gates for their own impossible return, share this video with them. Let them know they're not alone. Let them know that loyalty matters, even when it seems futile. Let them know that Max kept his vigil for 7 years, and his vigil meant everything. Until next time, remember this. True wealth isn't measured in mansions or bank accounts or possessions that outlive us. True wealth is measured in the promises we keep, the loves we honor, and the memories we refuse to let die. Max taught me that, and I hope, in telling you his story, I've passed that lesson on. Some things are worth waiting for. Some loves are worth remembering, and some stories, no matter how sad, need to be told. This was one of them.